Well, let's first get you the latest data. And India's active caseload has passed the 34 lakh mark with 3,68,147 fresh infections added in the last 24 hours. Now, this is 6% lower than yesterday's spike. Over 3,417 COVID-linked deaths have also been reported during this period. And this takes the total number of deaths due to coronavirus in the country to 2,18,959. Now, in the last 24 hours, around 15 lakh COVID tests were done, and this is nearly 3 lakh fewer than 18 lakh tests that were done the previous day. So even though today's count is 6% lower, we should factor in the fact that 3 lakh less tests of coronavirus were conducted, and usually this does happen between Sunday and Monday. On Monday, we usually get a depressed figure due to due to less testing that takes place. Now, states have put in several restrictions on their own dealing with the crisis, and Haryana, Punjab and Odisha are the latest to announce fresh restrictions to check the spread of coronavirus. Already restrictions in place in Delhi and Karnataka. Well, let's now talk about the variants and some good news about the vaccine effectiveness against the new strain of coronavirus in India, which we popularly call the double mutant strain. Now, a preliminary study by a team in Cambridge has found that vaccines will be effective in this variant as well. This variant, remember, has spread across the country. The study has found that the combination of two mutations in this variant do not help it evade antibodies. This is something we used to hear a lot about earlier. So this is good news. Again, it's a preliminary study, but it could be good news for vaccinations and how effective they will be in containing the strain and fighting against the spread of coronavirus. Well, to talk more about this, we're joined by Dr. Ravindra Gupta, Professor of Clinical Microbiology, Department of Medicine, University of Cambridge, someone who's involved in this study. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta, for joining us again. First and foremost, if you can, as simply as you can, explain what you have found in this preliminary study.
Okay, so what we did is we took some of the key mutations in this new variant, and we made artificial viruses with this mutated spike protein, and this is what a very commonly done thing. It has very good accuracy when you compare this to the real virus. So we were able to make different mutations that are found in the Indian variant, or the B617. And what we find is that this double mutant does not seem to have any extra resistance to antibodies compared to a virus which has one or other of the single mutations. So in other words, they don't add up to make a very resistant virus. There's still a little bit of reduced sensitivity to antibodies, so it has a small impact, but most people who are vaccinated, the vast majority, will be protected against this this particular combination of mutations. The caveat is, of course, we haven't done the full set of mutations, but we don't expect those full set of mutations to have a very big impact.
All right. And what does this mean in regard to reinfections? Because, you know, there, of course, we do know reinfections are taking place, of course. But in the first wave and the second wave, if you know, you've been infected with the previous variant in the first wave, and now with this variant that has, you know, spread across the country. So there are risks again of getting reinfected?
I think that's true from SARS-CoV-2. Reinfection can happen, and reinfection is more common potentially with variants such as the Indian variant. And the reason is because, as I said, there's a little bit reduced sensitivity to antibodies. So the virus has made some steps towards becoming a bit resistant to our immune responses. But there's another important thing. People who were infected first time around were infected maybe 6 or 9 months ago, and we know that immune responses may start declining, and that's why reinfection may happen anyway, because your immunity has dropped.
But can the antibodies from your previous infection, just to ask this again, can antibodies from the previous infection protect you against this new variant?
Well, so there are two ways of defining protection. Protection against death or severe disease. And the answer to that is probably yes. A previous infection probably protects you against very severe COVID. But it may not stop you getting mild or moderate symptoms and making you feel unwell if you were infected last year. So that's why the vaccine is really important, because the vaccine will boost your immune responses. We know that vaccines produce slightly additional responses, slightly stronger responses than natural immunity. That's what we think. So having the vaccine is really important, even if you have been infected before.
All right, and the vaccine protection is much better than your previous infection, the protection you get from the previous infection. I do know that a lot of you scientists are not happy with this term that was given, I think, by scientists, and then it's been used by the media a lot. This double mutant variant is what we call the Indian variant. There's also talk of another variant, it's being called the Bengal variant or triple mutant variant. But tell us about, how we've named it and your findings about these variants.
Yes, so I think the reason they called it double mutant is, I mean, I can understand it because there were two different mutations in a very critical part of the virus that were not seen together before, and each individually we thought had quite significant effects on how well antibodies are recognizing this virus. And that's why people got really worried and they called it double mutant. And that's why it was important that we did the studies in vitro to show that these mutations do not add up to a very dangerous virus or a very an escaped virus. So those are we did the experiments with each individual mutation and then both of them together, and we find that it's quite a modest effect. It's not extremely concerning, as some people have said. On the other hand, we should remember that the virus might be more transmissible because of another mutation further away, and we've seen that mutation also in the UK B117 variant, which is spreading very quickly in India as well. So the speed of spread may be related to the fact that the virus transmits better than previous strains. So we need to just keep that in mind. The triple mutant in West Bengal, I don't think should be labeled that. We should stop using the terms triple and double mutants, I think, and just refer to them as, something else. I'm not sure what that other thing is. You may refer it to
B1617. As you scientists refer to it, I suppose that is the most correct way. In fact, I was going to ask you about that. So we still don't know about how much more infectious or not this new variant is, because this is something, when it was announced in India that there is this double mutant variant there, we were told by the government that we don't know yet about how infectious it is. We do know that there were not enough studies, or we didn't, do enough of the research required into it. And looking at how it has spread now across the country in this second wave, many are jumping to that conclusion, of course, but we still don't know for sure whether it is more infectious.
Yes, it's really difficult to understand whether a virus is more infectious. You need to do very careful studies. And the only time we've been able to do this is for one virus which spread last year, which we are able to find it was more infectious. This B117 in the US and the UK, we've shown it to be more infectious and transmit faster. It's really tough to do this. You need very good health data. You need to match sequence data. And I don't think it's going to be possible in India to do this, unfortunately. So I think we should assume that it is highly transmissible, which we can see. But of course, SARS-CoV-2 is already a very transmissible virus. So we already have a problem virus on our hands. What is more important is the fact that this virus has been given the opportunity to spread because of large gatherings in India, which continued at the beginning of this year, and the lack of restrictions. And that is why we have an epidemic and an expansion of cases. That's the root cause of the whole problem.
Right. And Dr. Gupta, that has been talked about a lot, but we're also seeing this time around, and it could be just absolute numbers, that a lot of young people are getting affected and, deteriorating very fast. So again, this is not very clear. There's some reports that oxygen is required a lot earlier than what it was like the last time around. But again, these are all anecdotal, examples that we are given. And for sure, we don't know if this is, on one hand, more infectious, and on one hand, if the illness is more severe.
Yes, I mean, the most obvious explanation for young people getting ill is that, of course, even with the old virus, young people were getting ill. So it may just be because there are so many infections that you're observing a lot of young people, because let's say the number of cases per day is actually more like 2 million. Then you will expect to see, a few thousand young people getting severe disease. So it's all about how many infections are going on as to how many young people you observe with severe disease. So it's probably meaning that there's just really, really high rates of infection in India right now. That's the most obvious thing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us here at NDTV again. And of course, we'll be in touch with you about your study and, whether you find it more, right now we do know it's preliminary, and hopefully we will have more details about the study later. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, with India in the grip of the second wave of COVID and daily cases remaining over 3 lakh, even crossing the 4 lakh mark this weekend, help is now pouring in from across the world. Experts are emphasizing how India's crisis is everyone's crisis, as no one is safe till everyone is safe. Now, the US has also rolled out a series of supportive measures. Also, it's time now, many experts are saying, that vaccine manufacturers allow others to share their intellectual properties, they share the knowledge that they have, and ramp up the manufacturing of vaccines with other countries and other companies that are willing to manufacture the vaccines. Well, to talk more about this, we're now joined by Dr. Eric Fiegelding, epidemiologist and senior fellow, Federation of American Scientists, and someone who's been tracking, the spread of this pandemic very, very closely. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Now, we've seen how in recent days, countries across the world, including the US, have stepped up to help India. And just tell us why this is so important.
Yeah, I hope India right now is managing as much as it can, but the world needs to help. India can only do so much without the aid of the world. And by aid, I mean not just vaccines, but also oxygen and oxygen supplies and other drugs that are proven therapies, not unproven therapies, monoclonal antibody drugs when available. But every resource should be provided to India during this critical time.
And if you could explain, this thing, what experts are saying, they say that no one is safe until everybody is safe, and why no one can have this attitude of me first. It can't be America first or Europe first.
Yeah, I think people have to realize that this is a pandemic, that an outbreak in any country is every country's problem. This is a crisis that is not any domestic incident or domestic problem. This is something that if the world does not help India, the crisis will only further grow and endanger the world even more. And so by ending the pandemic and reducing the number of cases, we reduce the possibility that it could spread, that more variants will develop potentially that could be even more contagious, more evasive, and more severe. And that is definitely what we don't want. So by lowering cases and preventing further outbreaks, we prevent and slow and shorten the pandemic.
Now, there's also a lot of concern here over the variants. In fact, we were just discussing that about the double mutant variant and how it's been found across India. It's being seen as responsible for this surge. It's also been found in other countries.
Yeah, these variants are very concerning. The fact that it's outside India already means that potentially it's already unchecked. Now, we don't know the precise details of how contagious it is. The problem with that is without good knowledge of that, we don't know how to best potentially control it beyond just our conventional means. And there's potential risk that it's not just more contagious, but has more reinfection risk. Because we've seen in certain Indian hospitals with 500 doctors, 37 of them, even though they were fully vaccinated, still got reinfected. That means that this potentially could have some reinfection potential. And we've seen this with South Africa variant and the Brazil P1 variant. There are variants that learn to evade our immune system and learn to partly evade vaccines. And so this is why we have to take this seriously. This is not just another virus. It's not the same virus as Wuhan from early last year. This is potentially a new one. And if we do not keep the virus in check, if we do not vaccinate the world, if only the privileged countries vaccinate themselves, this virus will learn to mutate and then repenetrate even the countries that have been highly vaccinated. So it's behooving on us to help India and help every other poor country in the world that's suffering from this.
Now, currently the vaccination drive is underway. We have 2 vaccines here in India. We're getting another vaccine, that's Russia's Sputnik V vaccine. Though Brazil recently raised concerns about it, but Sputnik blamed this on politics. So what is your view?
Well, I think Sputnik has published its results and its efficacy are decent. But I think it would be good idea to provide even more data to allay any concerns and fears, because a vaccine's only as good as the public willingness to take it. And oftentimes, the more transparent you are, it actually helps the vaccine adoption and being used in more countries further. There's many other vaccines on the horizon. Also, there's in India what you call Covovax, developed by Novavax. That's also near the horizon for approval, hopefully soon in India as well as in the West. And so there's also further vaccines that are only $1.50 for development. That's also on the horizon. And potentially if we get a vaccine that is as cheap as $1.50 that's produced in India, it was developed in the US, that could even be an even bigger game changer, because that would be 10 times to 20 times cheaper than some of the other vaccines out there, and can allow India and the rest of the world to be vaccinated at a much higher pace. This is why we need to pool our resources. We need to waive some of these patents. The vaccines right now is a commodity right now that will literally save the world economy. By hoarding vaccines and hoarding intellectual property in the middle of a pandemic is just unethical. We have to think of humanitarian priorities before these profits. These companies will survive, and they're still making plenty of money. But right now, their customers are dying. The future of the earth and the economic stability on which these companies are also dependent on are also in potentially very fragile state. And the best way is to share the knowledge, waive the patents, and help more companies develop these vaccines for the world. That will get us out of this pandemic faster, and for all of us to economically recover.
All right, so you're talking about, sharing vaccine knowledge between countries, between companies. Now, here in India, we have an indigenously produced vaccine, that's Covaxin, and this has been produced by Bharat Biotech, a company in Hyderabad, along with the ICMR, India's medical agency. So given that, many are now questioning why can't other manufacturers be roped in to scale up the manufacturing of this particular vaccine, given that India currently is facing such a shortage?
Yeah. Absolutely. And there are many companies worldwide, 50 companies have actually come forward and say, we stand ready to produce vaccines that the world needs. We have the infrastructure. We just need the patents waived and a few specific technical instructions from the existing companies that hoard the IP. If they just share these minor technical details, so that we can adapt our equipment to produce them. There are 50 companies lined up to produce the components, complete the supply chain to make sure that we can roll out even more. And some companies potentially, they can build 500 to 1 billion doses more. These companies say they stand at the ready. All they need is the IP rights waived, and a few minor technical details on the vaccine design. This is not something that only rich countries can do. This is not something that only Serum Institute of India can do. Many, many companies can do it around the world, from Bangladesh to Canada. And we have to share that knowledge. And it's just so urgent and of a priority for the world.
Absolutely, I totally agree. With this thought and this push for vaccines to be produced by other companies. Now, talking about medication here in India, we have this desperate search for remdesivir, also plasma, and this is something that has been ruled out by WHO. Though again, there are doctors here who feel that it does help in hospitalization or those who are hospitalized.
So remdesivir is shown to shorten the duration of hospital stays. It has some benefits, but it is not a silver bullet. It is not something that once you take the pill, it will magically cure you immediately with 100% success. Remdesivir is not that drug. It is just a illness-shortening drug, and its mortality benefits are very modest, if any. So I think we can't rely on these drugs per se, and drugs are expensive. Like the monoclonal antibody drugs, they're not cheap, and they're not easy to produce in high volumes. They're very limited because they're not your typical chemistry drugs. They're biologics that rely on very difficult and slow, painstaking production process. You know what is easier? Vaccines. Vaccines production is much, much higher volume than some of these biologics drugs. But in the meantime, I recognize that these drugs are potentially a partial, small window and pathway for some temporary relief. And convalescent plasma as well, but long-term and in the large scale, especially for a country like India, where hospital access is, of course, very limited for a lot of people in rural areas, the best way is vaccines. And there's no easy way around that. And this is why it's so urgent to ramp up vaccination production and not just leave it in the hands of just one or two companies, and ramp up the sharing of the raw materials needed for those production. So I hope the world can come together, waive the patents, and share knowledge in this time of global crisis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eric, for speaking to us again. Well, that's all the time we have on the show today. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.